Let's take a look at the life of a famous man, but by no means an ordinary one. We can do this all the more since he often said that in his life, there were no taboo subjects, anyone could ask him anything, and he would answer as honestly as he could. Stephen Paul Jobs, known to the world simply as Steve Jobs, was one of the most fascinating figures of recent decades. The former CEO of Apple was called many things: the bad boy of technology, a brilliant innovator, a creative leader, arrogant, ruthless, narcissistic, rebellious, opportunistic. But who was he, really? Where did he come from, and how did this man, through his smart devices, become such an enduring part of our daily lives? Steve Jobs' mother, Johann Carol Skeebel, was the daughter of a Catholic family of German immigrant origin. His father, Abdul Fattah John Jandali, the son of a wealthy Syrian Muslim family, came to the United States as a political refugee. The two met and fell in love at the University of Wisconsin, where Jandali was a teaching assistant and Skeebel was a senior student in speech therapy. Skeebel's strict Catholic parents were far from happy about the relationship. When they found out that their 23-year-old daughter was pregnant, her father threatened to disown her if she married that man. So Joanne decided it was better to give the baby up for adoption. She had only one condition regarding the adoptive parents: they had to be college educated. The first choice was a lawyer and his wife, but when they learned that the baby born on February 24, 1955, was a boy and not the girl they had hoped for, they declined. The next couple on the list presented a different issue: they hadn't even finished high school. According to accounts, Joanne hesitated for weeks, unsure of what to do, and delayed signing the legal adoption papers. In the end, she agreed, but only on the condition that the adoptive parents would do everything possible to ensure the child's education, including setting up a college fund from the very beginning. The adoptive parents kept their promise, but Jobs never even finished his first year of college, finding most of the classes unbearably boring. The professors, however, aware of his remarkable abilities, allowed him to attend any lectures he found interesting. Jobs, as in so many other things, acted unconventionally and cared little about rules. Let's pause here and take a look at how Jobs' life began. His conception wasn't planned. In fact, the news of his arrival was met with strong objections from his future grandfather. From this, we can assume that his mother lived the months of her pregnancy in a state of deep anxiety. That tension probably grew once it became clear she had to choose between her child and her family. Psychology suggests that the stress hormones circulating in a mother's body can influence the development of the fetus's nervous system, leading to structural and functional changes that may later affect the child's physical and mental health. Let's also notice another important pattern. Right after being born, two families gave up on Steve Jobs. His biological mother, despite her efforts to secure him the best possible future, gave him away. And the first couple, the lawyers, refused to adopt him simply because of his gender. Of course, such facts don't consciously reach a newborn, yet he still perceives the growing tension around him. Even if we should treat these interpretations with due caution, it's still striking that one of Jobs' later girlfriends said in an interview that he could never get over the feeling of rejection, a feeling that became a core pattern in his inner world. According to other accounts, Jobs also struggled with social integration in school. In the way typical of unwanted children, he became the victim of teasing, bullying, and exclusion. Could his classmates have somehow sensed that early wound, the very first injury of his life, and targeted him for it? Could the group dynamics typical of unwanted children have shaped his school years? It's equally interesting to consider the possible link between some of Jobs' peculiar habits and the early feeling of rejection he experienced. According to memories shared by friends and colleagues, as a young man he began following a strict diet. For a long time, he ate only fruits, vegetables, and various seeds. He became convinced that this diet had such a positive effect on his body that personal hygiene became unnecessary. However, his co-workers disagreed. The diet clearly didn't have the intended results, and soon they asked Jobs to work the night shift because of the strong odor he emitted. The way we treat our own bodies often reveals the deepest layer of our relationship with ourselves. Could it be that behind his strict diet and neglect of hygiene there was a lack of self-love? We might imagine that, in his decision-making, there was also an unconscious self-destructive tendency, as often happens in the case of unwanted children. Another revealing episode. Jobs was already in very poor condition. His immune system had weakened so much that he had to be protected even from the smallest infection. When his doctor asked him to wear a protective mask, he refused, saying that he didn't like the design of the mask. Let's now take a look at Jobs's famous perfectionism. Paul Reinhold Jobs, the adoptive father of Apple's founder, was a very skilled craftsman. Later, Jobs often said that he learned his attention to small details from his father, whom he frequently helped as a child in the improvised workshop set up in their garage. However, perfectionism is not merely a behavior learned from someone else. Often, the driving force behind the pursuit of perfection springs from a deep inner dissatisfaction. In order to avoid the guilt that arises from this feeling, the individual will do everything possible to live up to expectations, primarily those he sets for himself. For a perfectionist, flawless is merely acceptable. Could his famous obsession with perfection reflect an early experience of rejection? Is it possible that he was driven by an unconscious desire to prove his own worth, and thus, in the end, to rewrite the feeling of rejection? We don't have certain answers, of course, we can only weigh the possibilities. One thing is undeniable, the entire modern world watched in awe as each new Mac and iPhone appeared on the market, and almost every buyer felt, and still feels, a deep, almost intimate connection with the company's products. Jobs, whose sense of secure attachment had been damaged since the fetal period, practically bound people to the objects he created. Someone once told me, when I asked in confusion about this almost magnetic attraction. You know, owning an Apple product is more than just having a computer. It also means you belong to a family. Apple owners smile at you warmly, like a brother, wherever you are in the world. That really makes you think. A man whose biological parents, under family pressure, couldn't take on the task of raising him, went on to create a product that, in an unprecedented way in the tech world, awakens in its owners a deep, almost archaic, sense of belonging. In fact, after Joanne Skeeble's father passed away, Jobs' biological parents got married, and soon after, their second child, Mona Simpson, was born. Thus, Jobs came to have a biological sister, one he discovered only in adulthood, when he finally tracked down his mother. Mona, who had also been abandoned by their father, asked Jobs to join her in finding the man, but he refused and showed no curiosity about learning anything about him. At the age of 23, the same age his parents had been when he was born, Jobs himself became a father. However, his child received his name only years later, following the undeniable results of a DNA test. Their relationship was never a deep one. According to his daughter's own statements, she still carries the painful memory of rejection to this day. As if fate were repeating itself. The fact that Jobs long denied naming his first computer, Lisa, after his daughter reflects the ambivalent relationship he had with his own child. Through his work, Steve Jobs created something truly remarkable. His colleagues, often desperate to explain to him why some of his ideas were simply impossible to realize, remember him as someone who possessed a unique reality distortion field. Around him, even the impossible became possible. Jobs defied reality all his life. His iconic figure continues to inspire generations, but although he often succeeded in the world of technology and business, in his most intimate relationships he was both wounded and wounding in return. Shortly before his death, he said the following: "I like to believe that something remains after death. But maybe it's just like a switch, you flip it, and you're gone. Maybe that's why I never wanted to put on/off buttons on Apple devices. Now I already know. There are other things that matter, things that have nothing to do with wealth. Something much more important. Maybe it's connection, maybe art, maybe the dreams of our younger days. In life, there are no limits. Go wherever you wish. Reach as high as you want to reach. Everything is already there, in your heart and in your hands.